All right, let's get right into it. The semiconductor market is in a really strange place right now. We're seeing a bunch of different factors all colliding at once, creating what you can only call a perfect storm. And look, if you're an investor in this space, you absolutely need to understand what's happening, because these crosscurrents are changing everything.
So let's start with the big question, the mystery that's probably got a lot of investors scratching their heads. You look at the headlines and they make no sense. One article talks about a massive chip glut, companies drowning in unsold inventory. The next talks about a desperate chip shortage, with companies screaming for more supply. So which is it? How can both be true at the same time? Well, figuring that out is the key to unlocking this whole situation. And these two charts, side by side, they just lay it all out perfectly. Look over on the left there. See that? Inventory days for automotive and industrial chips are just soaring. I mean, they're going vertical. That is a classic glut. But then you look to the right, and you see what's happening with an AI powerhouse like NVIDIA. They are piling up inventory like there's no tomorrow. It's a strategic stockpile. See the difference? One sector's massive problem is another's strategic weapon.
Right, so let's talk about that inventory paradox. The really crucial thing to get here is that the market was already weak before any of the big external shocks hit. This inventory problem, it's been brewing for months. Think of it like a pre-existing condition that's about to make a bad situation a whole lot worse.
Okay, let's zoom in on this chart. You see those brown and yellow lines? That's the automotive and consumer chip segments. What this is showing us is inventory days, basically how long a chip sits on the shelf before it's sold. And look at that climb. It shot up to over 150 days. That is a huge red flag. It means there's way too much supply and not enough demand, and that's just poison for profitability. Now, check out the chart on the right. This shows you the painful consequence of all that inventory. It's a pretty brutal inverse relationship, right? The red line, inventory days, goes up, and the green line, gross margin, goes down. They're like magnets repelling each other. Why? Because every single day a chip sits in a warehouse, it costs money. Eventually, you have to slash prices just to get rid of it, and that absolutely crushes your margins. It's a direct hit to the bottom line. So, we've got this internal weakness, this big inventory problem. Now let's throw some gasoline on the fire, because this simmering market problem is about to collide head-on with a massive geopolitical crisis. We're talking about the conflict in Iran and the threat to the Strait of Hormuz. Now you might be thinking, what does that have to do with semiconductors? Well, everything. The world's most advanced chip fabs, think TSMC in Taiwan, Samsung in South Korea, they don't have their own energy. They import vast amounts of it, and a huge chunk flows right through that strait. And you have to remember, making these advanced chips is one of the most energy-hungry industrial processes in the world. So a choke point there is a choke point for the entire industry. And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? The fabs have high inventories of chips, but they have no inventory of cheap energy. That's the whole paradox right there. You can have warehouses stacked to the ceiling with chips, but if the power gets too expensive, or worse, gets cut off, your multi-billion-dollar factory just stops. The cost to make anything new is about to go through the roof. But believe it or not, it actually gets worse. So the energy crisis, that's a huge problem. It kills your margins. But there's another threat, a much more immediate one that could literally stop production cold. And it's a crisis that most people haven't even heard of, until now. I'm talking about helium. And no, not the stuff you put in party balloons. This is an absolutely non-negotiable, mission-critical ingredient for making advanced chips, especially for those incredible, super sophisticated EUV machines that ASML builds, the ones that make the chips powering all the AI we're seeing. There is literally no substitute for helium in that process. You run out of helium, your fancy cutting-edge production line is just a very expensive paperweight. And here's the kicker. The world's single largest source of helium? It's a massive field shared by Qatar and, you guessed it, Iran. And because of the conflict, because of infrastructure damage, a full 1/3, 33% of the entire global supply is gone. It's just offline. And let me be clear, this isn't some forecast for next year. This is happening right now, today. And you can see the world is finally starting to notice. Just look at this Google Trends chart. Searches for helium chip have just gone parabolic. The cat is out of the bag. The panic is just starting to ripple through the market as people connect the dots and realize just how serious this is. So what happens when a resource this critical becomes this scarce? Well, you're forced to make some pretty brutal choices. If you're a fab manager and you only have a little bit of helium left, are you going to use it to make a cheap $5 chip for a car's dashboard? Or are you going to use it to make a $40,000 AI chip for NVIDIA? It's a no-brainer, right? Production for all those low-margin sectors, automotive, consumer goods, it gets sacrificed. It has to be. And that creates a forced shortage in those areas, no matter how much inventory they already have. This whole situation just massively tilts the playing field in favor of the high-margin AI guys.
Okay, so let's pull back for a second. What does all of this mean for the big picture? You've got the inventory glut, the energy shock, and now a helium crisis. These pressures combined are forcing a fundamental, once-in-a-generation shift in how companies think about their supply chains. The old playbook, the one that worked for decades, it's basically being thrown out the window.
For the last 30 years, everything was about just-in-time. The goal was efficiency above all else. That meant keeping your inventory as lean as possible, because inventory was seen as a waste, a liability on your balance sheet. Well, that world is over. We are now living in a just-in-case world. The new goal isn't efficiency, it's resilience. It's survival. And in this world, holding a massive inventory isn't a weakness anymore. It's a strategic asset. It's your moat. It's your weapon.
Okay, so if you're an investor, how do you play this? How do you navigate this completely new reality? Well, let's use this new just-in-case lens and look at one company in particular, a company that, whether they planned it this way or just got lucky, seems perfectly positioned for this exact moment. Hey, remember this chart from the beginning of our talk? That insane vertical climb in NVIDIA's inventory. You know, just a few months ago, a lot of analysts on Wall Street would have looked at this and called it a huge red flag. They'd say, oh, sales must be slowing down. But today, in a world where you can't be sure if you can even make new chips, this doesn't look like a liability. This looks like a brilliant masterstroke. It's a fortress of supply in a world of scarcity. This table really is the perfect summary of the whole situation. Let's just walk through it. We started with an inventory problem, which was putting pressure on margins. Then, boom, geopolitics and this helium crisis hit. Suddenly, that inventory glut isn't a weakness, it's a critical buffer. Margins are under even more pressure from costs. And the AI sector? It goes from being the hot growth area to being literally the only priority for production. The whole game has been flipped on its head.
So here's the bottom line for every investor watching. The old rules are gone. We can no longer take for granted that companies can just make more chips whenever they want. In this new just-in-case world, the power, the real advantage, shifts to the players who control the existing inventory. So the question you have to ask yourself now isn't just who has the best tech. It's, in a world of scarcity, who's actually prepared?